Good afternoon, Paula. Can we do a quick mic check?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you so much. Loud and clear.
So we're the early birds.
Yes, we're gonna get started here in a few minutes, but we appreciate you joining us early so we can make sure everyone's audio and video is working. Good afternoon, Mary Emma. Can we do a quick sound check?
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Carmelo, I see you've joined us. Can we do a quick mic check?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We're gonna wait a few more minutes for a few others to join. Until then, I'm just gonna get a few sound checks. Emily, Miss Hannah, can we do a quick audio check for you?
Absolutely, Alex. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect.
Miles, can we do a quick audio check? Mr. Enton? All right. All right. Aaron, I see you've joined us. We do a quick audio check.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, we can hear you loud and clear. All right. Waiting for a couple others to join, and then we're gonna get this meeting started to make sure we can wrap up on time. Just give us one more moment. All right, we're going to go ahead and get this meeting started. This meeting is being recorded and streaming live to YouTube. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and officially begin the first project visioning team meeting for the 10th Street study. At today's meeting, please keep your microphones muted unless you've been recognized to speak. And of course, use those virtual raise hand feature to participate in today's discussion. Go to the next slide. A bit about accessibility. We want this and really any and all future of our online meetings to be accessible to the public. This meeting was advertised on Metro Plan Orlando's website, and participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need any of these accommodations to participate in the future, please do contact Metro Plan Orlando staff. Next slide, please. Today's agenda focuses on existing conditions and initial public feedback, and how this really feeds into later steps of our project concept development. Today's meeting also includes a public comment period, and members of the public who want to speak can use their raise hand feature on the Zoom screen, or if you're attending by phone, you can hit *9 at the appropriate time to raise that hand, and we'll reach you. So again, today's meeting beginning now, trying to wrap up in the next 90 minutes to 2 hours. And to do that, we'll go to the next slide and talk about our project visioning team. This group, and thank you each for joining and agreeing to participate with us on this study, is a comprehensive and diverse set of interested parties, as you can see, both public and private, to kind of in an interest of time, instead of oral introductions, if you could please type your name and organization into the chat feature within the Zoom application located at the bottom of the screen, and it should pop up right-hand side. Go ahead, type your name and agency, and we'll use that both to create, the record for the meeting, but also have a better understanding of who's on and who's joining us today. So appreciate for doing that. But as you can see, diverse group, and intentionally diverse within the city to make sure as we transition this project, it truly is implementable and has. So we can go to the next slide. And we're really going to jump into the project overview. But before we do that, I just wanted to say a couple words. So again, my name is Alex Trauger with Metro Plan Orlando. I'm the manager of transportation planning. And one of the things that we do, aside from long range and regional transportation plans, is helping our local governments really advance their priorities and advance local initiatives. And in coordination with city staff, this corridor and the desire to study and recommend future solutions for 10th Street came to our attention. So through our special projects program that we have at Metro Plan Orlando, we're advancing this along with other local corridor study projects in the Central Florida area. So I am the project manager for Metro Plan Orlando, but the project is being developed and supported by HDR and our two project managers, Jeff Arms and Jen Rhodes. I'm actually going to hand things off over to them. They can introduce themselves a little more, and we can talk more about the project itself. Thank you.
There we go. I should be fully unmuted. Someone yell at me if I'm talking and no one can hear. You can hear me. All right. So I'm Jeff Arms. I'm with HDR. Jen Rhodes is in the conference room with me, as is Melissa Picaro. And we are working on this project with Alex for the past few months. We got a lot of good data already and feedback. So we're looking to get some more data and feedback. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. Feel free to do the raised hand and stop me at any time. Hopefully I won't miss that you raise your hand. So if you want to stop and talk about a slide or ask a question, this is meant to be interactive, not just me talking to you the whole time. Also did want to say it's good to see a lot of familiar faces as well as some new faces and new folks that I'm excited to meet and work with on this project. So we've been enjoying working with St. Cloud staff, Osceola County staff already, as well as Metro Plan Orlando staff. So we're talking about 10th Street today, and this is really a critical east-west corridor that connects to downtown St. Cloud. As you approach downtown St. Cloud from the east and the west, it really kind of is going to help set the stage for what downtown St. Cloud's ultimately going to be. We're trying to really make this to be a true multimodal study and consider all the modes and just consider what the ultimate infrastructure improvements that could go towards achieving the vision that's already been laid out by some other plans, as well as building on that with this study itself. Where we are right now, we're in what we like to call the defining success stage. District 5 in the past, when they've done these kind of corridors they've called it defining the problem. And we've tried to flip that around a little bit and talk about the success. What does it really look like? Like what's a realistic but yet visionary approach of what we would like to achieve with the project? And we're about to the end of this phase, and then we're going to be diving into the alternatives. And then we are going to develop some concepts. They're going to be engineering scale drawings on like an aerial, so people can really understand. It's going to lay the groundwork for what the corridor could ultimately be. And it really is like almost like the first stage of project development. The outreach schedule, we're towards the end here on the defining success stage. We're going to take the feedback that you all have from today, and then we're going to have another visioning team meeting, and then follow it up with some virtual public meetings, another online survey about our alternatives, some pop-up meetings at some events, and then after that, we'll go into the concept development phase, which would be some more formalized briefings, and then ultimately we'll wrap it up with a recommendations video to really truly memorialize and have a product that the public and the city and everyone, the stakeholders, can get behind and be able to kind of continue to strive towards implementing. So now we're just going to walk you through what's been done before, and Jen's going to start talking. It may still say me because, like I said, we're in the same conference room together, but Jen Rhodes, go ahead.
Jeff's voice isn't going to magically change. So if it says he's talking, it sounds like me talking. So starting to look at the corridor, we broke the corridor into different segments to kind of define the land use as well as some of the corridor characteristics. So you can see them on the screen, areas 1, 2, and 3. So starting from the west, area 1, we've called like the medical arts area from US 192 to Columbia Avenue. And then this area 2 is really this kind of the transition into the historic grid from either side, east and west, into kind of the center of St. Cloud's downtown. So we've called that the historic grid, and it goes from Columbia Avenue to Eastern Avenue, which is kind of the limits of the city and county line. And then area 3 we've called like the suburban transition. So that is mostly within the county, and there is some kind of larger plots out there, as well as some future development and redevelopment that's happening out there. So that's from Eastern Avenue to Narcoossee Road. As far as the typical sections for each of the segments, starting looking, working our way from the west, this is the first typical section from US 192 to Columbia Avenue. The lanes are pretty narrow out there, 9 to 10 foot lanes with no curb or gutter or shoulder. They just kind of drop off. There's a 5-foot sidewalk on the north side for part of that segment, and there are some sidewalk gaps, and then there's a drainage swale on the south side. That is part of that segment is within the St. Cloud Medical Arts Campus overlay, which takes up that whole square you can see on the screen. But the portion of 10th Street between McKay Street and Columbia Avenue is within that campus overlay. So they've already identified a proposed or future typical section for that segment within that plan that looks at adding some on-street parking. So we're going to try to take that into account and incorporate it into that where possible. Moving on to the second segment, which is from the historic grid and through downtown, we're still at 50-foot right-of-way, but it does widen out to have 8-foot parking lanes on each side, 11-foot lanes, and then 10-foot sidewalks. There's also, for a small segment of that between Massachusetts Avenue to Florida Avenue, there is 90% design plans complete for that. So this is kind of a rendering of what that would look like. They're bricking the streets, and it's going to look very similar to the updates that were just recently put in along New York Avenue. And so there'll be some nicer parallel parking and some street trees, as well as maintaining the 10-foot sidewalk. As for the final segment, the suburban transition, there is some utility poles out there, some sidewalk gaps. The right-of-way widens out in some segments, but it's kind of in a residential area where there's this 24-foot buffer of right-of-way before the sidewalk. And then the lanes are also fairly narrow in this segment as well, 9 to 10 feet with no curb or gutter or shoulders. We'll be taking into consideration and really trying to be consistent with the vision that was outlined in the Envision St. Cloud Master Plan, which is really looking to create a strong and livable downtown and focusing on transportation improvements to the bicycle and pedestrian linkages into that downtown. We also reviewed the trail and bike connections. There's especially a lot of north-south connections that cross 10th Street, so we want to pay special attention to those intersections that are outlined with the squares that kind of has an intersection between either an existing or planned trail or bike facility. So we'll see how we can tie into those north-south connections. And there's also 3 utility projects that are outlined in the utility master plan. So this is going to be important when we're considering phasing of our project and to make sure that we can do those utility improvements and roadway improvements at the same time. And pass it back to Jeff.
It's just a final thought on the utility master plan. I know we have someone from OUC on as well today, and we're excited about kind of collaborating because perhaps on some of these studies, we don't know that a utility has an improvement planned, and maybe we can leverage that investment that they're going to make and that infrastructure capital project at the same time. So this really could be, that's one of the purposes of these meetings. So we're excited to have you. The existing and future land use, there's not too big of a difference between the two. The only areas I would kind of highlight is a little bit more refined vision near the medical arts campus, as well as a little bit more of a transition around the downtown with some of the properties and land uses. To the very, very east end, there is that big pocket of commercial with the strip center. From there, we'll go ahead and talk about we've got a lot of slides so that we're not showing you on the population demographics and really trying to understand that. And we've used that information to help target our specific outreach to different groups and how they best receive their information. So that's really played a big part in our outreach effort to date. But we do note that we understand Osceola County has a larger Hispanic population, but I would note that St. Cloud is actually a little bit less than the county as a whole. But you can see where the pockets of density really are closer as you get closer to the downtown. When it looks at the walking and biking conditions, we wanted to highlight that, we understand the sidewalk network is kind of disconnected in pockets. We've got a really good inventory with where we have it on both sides, one side, and we've highlighted some bike ped crashes that have occurred and at several locations. So we're going to keep digging in a little bit deeper. Where those crashes occurred, there's actually some of the hot spots along the corridor for crashes in general. Links, I know there's been some conversation about shifting shifting the route that does run along Route 10 to be running along 192 instead, and then serving part of the St. Cloud area with like a flex route. And we just did notice, or wanted to note, the transit boarding and alighting hotspots or heavier areas near the downtown. Also want to take special attention if the routes do shift down to 192, paying special attention to where those connections and which corridors provide links from 10th Street down to stops on 192. So making sure that we look at the sidewalk and bike connections north-south to connect as well. Do you want to touch on the vehicle speeds, Jen?
Sure. So we did some analysis of a speed study in 3 locations. So really we were trying to focus on this idea of putting bike head safety at the forefront, really the difference in survival rates that occur in this range between 20 and 40 miles per hour. So currently the speed limit is 25, starting from the western end down to Eastern Avenue, and then it's 30 miles per hour out to Narcoossee Road. But really there's over 50% of the traffic is going over the speed limit, with special emphasis on the number of vehicles that are going over 40 miles per hour every single day. So really you can see that number picks up at spot location 3, so east of Eastern Avenue, you're having almost 2,500 vehicles a day that are going over 40 miles per hour. So that's just 2,500 times where there's a chance of a pedestrian cross-check, they likely would not survive. So really highlighting that speeding is kind of an issue along this corridor, even with the narrow lanes that exist out there today.
The traffic patterns, MetroPlan has a license with the street light data, so we're able to kind of get a good assessment of how the corridor is being used. And not a lot of traffic is using it as an entire through route or corridor. It's really being used as more of a collector, in combination with several other streets where that predominantly feed it. Like, for example, Columbia Avenue and Old Hickory Tree are definitely major corridors that people use to access 10th Street, as well as, in the core, in the middle, and then on each end at Narcoossee and over at 192 at the very, very western end. When it comes to the traffic volumes, you can see there's the range that Jen had talked about. And really the takeaway here is we looked at both the existing traffic and kind of a understanding of the future traffic growth and pattern. It's been pretty flat as far as traffic volume growth. The takeaway is we're not looking at we need to add lanes or increase capacity on the roadway. There's not locations where we need to be adding turn lanes, really, even at critical intersections. There's not locations that are really just showing high levels of capacity constraints or capacity issues. So it's really about trying to accommodate the traffic that's there in a safer, low speed, more multimodal approach into the future. You want to talk about the crashes, Jen?
Sure. So first we looked at kind of all of the crashes, and they were dispersed pretty regularly throughout the corridor and at the 20 different intersections. So then we took another look just at the injury crashes, and there we could really see some hot spots. So those are definitely intersections that we want to pay attention to, special attention to, looking at our recommendations moving forward. So 34% of all injury crashes occurred at Columbia Avenue, and then 7% at Michigan Avenue and 9% at Orange Avenue. So those 3 intersections really kind of stand out when you're looking at just the injury crashes. There were some crashes over at US 192, but they've done some improvements to that intersection, so the crashes have dropped off a bit since that improvement was constructed.
Yeah, the question about the traffic, most of the traffic was done pre-COVID, like the traffic volumes. We took into account and looked at the trend of the volumes both before COVID. Some of the crashes did go into the COVID period, but most of it, like the crash period, was pre-COVID.
Yeah, so the traffic, was it about the traffic?
It was just when was the traffic?
Yeah, so the traffic, to get these ranges, we looked at a combination of the FDOT count stations, the St. Cloud, or the Osceola County count stations, and then St. Cloud had 3 spot locations. So the counts were done this January by the city, but we did look back at the historic counts from DOT and the counties to kind of compare and make sure that they weren't off too much. So the counts kind of pre-COVID and during this year and last year were fairly similar. So that's kind of how you see that range too, like the 5,000 to 6,000 and 4,000 to 6,000 is taking into account, like looking at numbers from 2018, 2019 through 2021.
Hopefully that answers your question. Jen, go ahead. You can keep going with the online feedback then.
Okay, yeah. So that kind of summarized some of what we looked at with the existing conditions, and then at the same time as we were looking at that, we also had an online survey that we pushed out to the public, as well as a comment map using wiki mapping. And so we got 548 responses to that online survey, and while it was pushed out, there are a variety of methods kind of countywide. We did get targeted responses from people that are really using 10th Street. So 80% of the respondents said they travel regularly along 10th Street, and around 50% say they live or work on 10th Street. So some of the ways that we kind of push out information about the survey was through social media, Facebook and Nextdoor. We also did send out postcards to people within 300 feet of the corridors, kind of on both sides. 900 postcards went out that way. There is information about the survey in the City of St. Cloud newsletter. There were dynamic message boards put up announcing the survey, as well as some other information notices through emails and the website. So one of the questions that we asked was kind of how they currently use 10th Street and how they would like to use 10th Street. So here we've made a chart that kind of shows where the gap is, and you can really see the difference with both walking and riding a bike. But riding a bike, I think, is the most significant one, where 28% of respondents currently ride a bike on 10th Street, but 50% would really like to. So there's a lot of opportunity there to improve conditions where people feel comfortable riding a bike on 10th Street. So similarly, one of the questions had been rank these different issues as kind of their top priority to your lowest priority of what you think the recommendation should be. So in line with the last slide, the top issue and thing they would like to address is a place to safely ride a bike, followed closely by filling in gaps in the sidewalk, as well as improving the safety of crossing the street and car speeding. We also got over 200 additional ideas and comments, kind of free response comments for 10th Street and recommendations related to that. So we've kind of gone through those and summarized and categorized them. So over 50% were related to safety, a lot of concerns about not only speeding, people walking and biking kind of in the street because of a lack of sidewalks, but also like the lane width was very narrow, and some of the turning radii or sight lines turning on and off 10th Street as well. And then there were a variety of comments related as well to stormwater, transit, the community economic opportunities, as well as just kind of supportive comments of looking at Complete Street project. There's also the online comment map where we got 26 responses. A lot of comments suggested kind of different north-south connections for bicycles and pedestrians, as well as kind of highlighting points of interest along 10th Street that we could incorporate into the project. Calling out where the different sidewalk gaps are and needed to be filled, And then these are just kind of a sampling of what some of the comments were showing. All right, back to Jeff.
Sure. So when we get ready to go into the alternative stage, we're going to actually be able to kind of quantify and evaluate qualitatively how different alternatives will address different goals and objectives of the corridor. And from building upon the previous studies and really taking an assessment of the existing conditions and the survey and things, we had really broken down to kind of 4 main goals in 4 main categories, as you can see. And then within each, we were able to basically develop different objectives that we would like to try to achieve to try to help address different issues that we've seen from the analysis and the data. And these are, like I said, the initial draft, and a big part of why I want to dwell on this slide a little bit more is this might be some where we would get some follow-up discussion. Could also be one where, you know, some of the stakeholders here may follow up after the meeting with different ideas or suggestions. But we feel like that these goals and objectives are a pretty good start on capturing what a lot of the direction and where the vision is going for this corridor and what we're trying to achieve. So I think we got, how many more slides do we have, Jen? About not too many.
Yeah, we're in the last, I think, 5
so we
or
can always
6.
count,
So we can circle back to this one too, yeah, if people want to think on their ideas, because we definitely want to kind of finalize these goals and objectives after this meeting. So if you have any additional bullet points that we should add as objectives, tweaks to how the goals are phrased, we'd love to hear that feedback.
So we'll keep going and have a chance. So I want to highlight, you know, obviously this is a complete streets study. Everybody on this call, for the most part, understands that complete streets is just about designing for all the users. But as you can see, the focus and really the basis of that is starting with the most vulnerable users of people walking, biking, then transit, then people driving, and just really some different ways we consider those and what that really tries to mean. And a lot of this study and a lot of the safety aspects are about trying to design the roadway or change the complexion of it to really manage the speeds, really kind of bring it down to more of a human scale. FDOT has actually done quite a bit with trying to change their approach to designing projects. So just wanted to highlight that the way they've talked about, they have a whole section on speed management, and they focus on the categories of enclosure, making it look visually a tighter corridor, bring it down to humans, and then the next one is engagement, about trying to make sure that you can kind of interact and make visual contact with the different users along the corridor and send those clues to the drivers that this is a different place that they need to be slowing down. And then there's deflection. This is both horizontal and vertical, trying to make sure that drivers aren't just going straight shot the whole way through. So what do these different categories, what are some specific examples? Let me go ahead and show you on the next slide. We tried to just give you some different examples of how these categories would work, or some of the tools in the toolbox, so to speak. So we have, you know, the speed humps, islands, roundabouts, bulb outs, on-street parking, narrowing lanes and like short blocks, beacons and driver feedback signs. It's always kind of tricky though when we're talking about 50-foot right-of-way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes some of the tools in the toolbox are harder to implement. Like for example, in a 50-foot right-of-way, roundabouts are a little bit more challenging. It might end up being more like a neighborhood traffic circle. And what does that look like? Then on the next one, a lot of the discussion too is on short blocks and visually narrowing the length of the, not narrowing, but shortening the length of the block. So maybe that's putting in more crosswalks across the corridor, more just reinforcing it's not one long continuous stretch. So.
That was a comment.
Yeah, I understand that comment about the roundabouts and buses. We would certainly have to consider the design of roundabouts to accommodate buses along the corridor in the future phases. I was just probably more making the comment that this corridor being as narrow as it is actually makes it more challenging to even for roundabouts to be a feasible solution as opposed to other places. Some other multimodal strategies, we talk about a lot of different bicycle facilities, things we can do with transit stops, different painting of intersections, ped scale lining, fewer driveway connections. So from there, we're really just kind of down to, we've covered most of our material. Next steps, like I said, we want to make sure we're considering everyone's input and ideas as we start to formally develop alternatives. What we have heard is that we need to try to, as far as the alternatives, we have heard from some of the feedback from the city that something more of a urban, meaning like curb and gutter type of cross section without the open swales is the general direction we would go. This project and what we're actually doing in this stage doesn't include like a drainage study or detailed utility coordination. So what we want to do is capture what all the issues and opportunities are, if that's the direction we're heading, so that when the project is developed at the next stage, that we're aware of those and have almost like a good playbook of what challenges and opportunities there are going forward. So with that, I can ask Alex to come back on and chime in, and then we could also go back to the goal slides. I can see some more chats of things people want to talk about.
Yeah, I think we can have people come unmute themselves if we want to have more of an open discussion as well. And
then the other way we can do it is we could go back to the map and kind of talk about different issues almost segment by segment. Why don't we start at we still have about an hour and a half left total, which I don't think we need the hour and a half left, but we'd like to have some discussion. Maybe go to the map slide, Jen, like what in the segments.
Was this helpful?
Or how about one of the ones with like where the stop signs are, where you can see like where the pedestrian features are. I forget which slide that is.
So
that one, that works. That works.
This is a good one. I think this is a good segue point here. And, obviously a little challenge with the virtual meeting, with this kind of typical roundtable approach. But what we're really trying to gain here, as Jeff mentioned, is twofold. Insights from your local knowledge and experience along the corridor that may not show up in the data. As we presented, very data informed, coordinated with, interested parties, but also, there's always those insights that can be gained by coming together kind of in this collaborative fashion. So if we can get those segment by segment, great, or any insights at all. And then second are those goals and objectives, kind of going back to those. So let's take it segment by segment first, but I also would like to build some consensus around those goals and objectives, because I believe they're very important, especially as we get into the latter steps of our work, where we'll use those as criteria in a kind of a rubric fashion to evaluate the different concepts that are being developed, to review those different alternatives. So let's keep that in mind. First, I guess we can take it from the top with insights, but I would like to get some feedback on those goals and objectives. And of course, we will send those out to the project visioning team members, give them a little time to kind of digest. But any discussion and questions we have today would be great to take on. So members, please, before I start picking on folks. I know Beverly's had some really great comments, as it pertains to school bus operations on the corridor. So anyone else? Miles, Transit? Hate to pick on you, but I know you, so it's easy.
You want to go to the transit one?
I just joined the meeting. I'm sorry. This isn't fair.
We'll put the couple transit slides on there, Miles.
Let me get to the transit slide and we can give you a quick recap of what we said. So this is what we had for the transit slide. Oh, went too far, sorry. It's currently the Lynx Route 10, pretty good headways and frequencies, 30 minutes and 1 hour on the weekends. But we did make a note that there was a potential, instead of following this looping route, to relocate it onto US 192, and then also the idea of maybe potentially providing a flex route. So anything you can add to that or thoughts about that?
Yeah, or just update us on the status of, is this still the current thinking?
Yes, that adjustment is still the current thinking. In fact, we at Osceola County's request just put in a service development grant last week for those modifications. So it would be straightening out link 10 to stay along 192, and then a neighbor link that would, demand response north and south of 192 to capture those areas vacated, pretty much, all the way up to Lakeshore Boulevard, and then south down to 17th Street with the neighbor link, and then the 192 route, the link 10 would run to Narcoossee, and a new route would run along Narcoossee all the way up to the Nemours Hospital in Lake Nona. So there's potentially some big changes, but these would not occur if awarded the grant until December of 22.
No, that's great feedback. And Miles, sorry to put you on the spot, but always good insights, and that's helpful as we advance along. There were some feedback that we received from the public, for interrelating to transit on 10th Street. So we just need to keep that in mind as service is altered and is moved a couple of blocks south.
Miles, can I just clarify, where's the Route 10? Where will it terminate, or is there a turnaround, or how's that going to work?
The turnaround is tentative, so it would traverse down and go just past Narcoossee, and I think it's pretty much like the first right-hand turn east of Narcoossee Road. I think there's a gas station there. It would turn right there. There's a little side street just south of the gas station, and that would be the point at which it would turn around and then head back west along 192.
Okay. I don't think it would go all the way to Nova Road, though. It would be just past Narcoossee. Someone asked, I think Beverly asked in the chat.
We'll check them in.
So, and Beverly did ask a question about better connections all the way to the lakeshore, aside from a few key corridors for bike ped. And I know that's something the Envision St. Cloud corridor did have some of those connections. I think you had your key bike ped connections.
Here we had some connections.
Those are the corridors. Like Dakota has the bike trail that connects north-south.
I think Florida Avenue would be
in Delaware. Yep.
the main one.
So, all right, let's go back to the segment map, though. Unless Miles has any last transit things.
I'm just typing in the chat the road that it would be turning back. It's Live Oak Boulevard is the street. It's right past Narcoossee.
Okay.
That's all.
And I see Aaron's comment too, and we'll touch on that when we get to that segment. That's great. Thank you, Aaron. Anything else? Go to the next slide, Jen, where we focus on the medical arts. This is the area with a lot of the mobile home park, and it's transitioning to be like a lot of redevelopment potential. Any other thoughts, feedback, ideas on that segment that anyone wants to chime in? I know Columbia is a location where we have a lot of concerns with that intersection.
I had some comments. This is Erin. Just the presence of that intersection at 192, it really is very understated. It's just right in, right out. And you cannot make a left crossing 192. There's no signal. And so it's just a very low key impression. So the idea that it's this parallel corridor to 10th Street, for someone who's just traveling through, it doesn't give you that impression. And then when you're coming west, I noticed the pavement condition, because the curve is so steep that the pavement is degrading there because everyone's braking while they're turning. And so on 10th Street there, just the condition of that pavement is really terrible. So I'm just wondering, I don't know the extent of the right of way there, if there's anything that can be done at that intersection that might resolve both of those things, or if anyone has talked about that yet.
I know there were changes on 192 as it relates to some of the access management, where it specifically ties in that within the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that if we did change and, like, say you put it as a signalized full intersection, that might change, or even a directional left, like it might change what some of the patterns would be, and might result in but it could result in more traffic. So we can go back and take a look at that too. But I think one thing that makes sense is as definitely a better gateway at that location, and then as another gateway at Columbia. Jen, didn't you used to be able to turn left, and now you have to like do a U-turn to get there?
Yes, I believe that's what it was. Now it's just a right in, right out. Yeah, and I think that has caused the traffic to now kind of come up, and you turn north on Columbia Ave and then get onto 10th Street that way, or get back down to 192 through Columbia Ave. So I agree, that's kind of like an awkward entrance gateway into 10th Street.
And I definitely don't think, like, given the proximity to Brown Chapel Road and the commercial that's off of that, and that there's any opportunity to signalize it. It's just, if that is not the area that we're focusing on drawing attention to this corridor, then, you know, if the Columbia connection has some focus.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's anyone else from the city or any other stakeholders that maybe knows more of the history on that change. I know there's some other changes that are also in the works on 192, with some like R-cut type intersections, different, where they're going to create some better pedestrian access as well. Miles, have you all been coordinating some of those changes with DOT, with where you're going to put the bus stops, or you haven't gotten to that point?
Not gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
I think one of the things the city had talked about as kind of a long-term vision, and maybe it was in the medical arts campus, but like the kind of relocating part of 10th Street, or kind of changing that configuration. But I think that's more of a long-term vision that's outside of really what we'd be looking at this study. Reconfiguration. You
mean like a realignment?
Realignment, yeah. Right. Realigning 10th Street and to connect to 13th or 192.
So, but it sounds like you can do some more follow-up with what the access management plans are on 192, understanding where those PED connections are going to be, and try to also coordinate with what could happen with the Links route. It's a little off the corridor, but we need to really think through how those connections are going to work. So, okay.
Second segment?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. Before you go on that last one, The sidewalk was just on which side? Is that the north or the south side for where it's? Oh, that's existing
Mainly on
conditions.
the-
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So this is
yeah,
the
yeah.
existing conditions, right? So it's on the north side, and then there's a drainage swale on the south side.
It actually, I think it flips back and forth in some pockets in that. Well, maybe it's just past Columbia where it
I
changes.
could go to the spot. Yeah, it's hard to.
It's hard because this whole corridor is 4 miles long, so
Right.
it's hard to keep track of where the sidewalks starts and stops.
But the plan
we've got
is
a
to
ton-
do it on both sides of the sidewalk.
Well, we're not to the alternative
Okay.
formally.
Well, this is the, I guess, yeah, so for our study, we haven't looked at what we'd be recommending. This is where, what was recommended in this medical arts campus
Yeah.
overlay. So between McKay Street and Columbia, they have this typical section that we're showing on the screen with the on-street parking and correct a 5-foot sidewalk on both sides.
And I would anticipate we would have some type of pedestrian facility on both sides. But with a lot of the comments and the feedback we've gotten, we can kind of keep this in mind. We've talked about what would a bike facility along the corridor look like? Would it be a parallel trail? Just ideas like that is kind of where we would start getting to with the next, there's just limited in what you can do in a 50-foot right of way. I guess the closest example of something like that I'm talking about would be like Bumby Avenue in Orlando. You know how there's the 10-foot path that runs parallel to Bumby itself.
Mhm.
Okay, keep going. So back to the area we're calling the historic grid. There's definitely a good connection at Dakota. Is what kind of one of the first main connections going north, and taking into account like some of those signalized access points and where the bus stops could be, is going to be key. You can see where the very few stop signs except for in the core.
Emily, did you have a question? Saw you unmuted momentarily.
Thanks, Alex. Not a question, just a couple comments on the first segment, but I didn't know if you wanted to go back and talk about bike ped stuff
We can.
across the corridor, if you want to break it up per segment.
We could go either way. I mean, you want to do all your bike ped comments on a bike ped slide? Would that help you?
Well, what I wanted to chime in is that we've got 2 specific crossings that are a part of the Best Foot Forward program that we monitor. One of those is Robinson and 10th. The other is Mississippi and 10th on the other side of the corridor. So we have field observations from our data collectors. We have all the data yield rates that have been collected, photographs. We've gone out at night and done a night audit of these 2 crosswalks as well. So this is information that we've already collected and would be happy to share with you. But I wanted to share with you some of the observations specifically at the Robinson and 10th. That community is a mobile home park, and they're unfortunately the only gap in the sidewalks on that corridor in that segment are right next to that community. And so we've done some outreach, and they're very vocal about wanting to use their bicycle to get around, but again, not having the comfortability to do so. And then we've noticed too that vehicles kind of entering and exiting, and I think this kind of goes to maybe Aaron's comment, don't realize that there's pedestrian activity here. I think it's kind of confusing. It's like somewhat industrial, somewhat not. You've got kind of the backs of some of those bigger, larger buildings. So it doesn't really feel like it's meant to have people crossing the street. And I think that's why we've gotten low yield rates at that specific location. And I think there's better enhancements that could be made at that specific crossing to really identify that. I did want to make a comment real quick on the transit slide. And I know that Florida Avenue, I know we're going to talk about this, and Aaron said that project is starting to get under construction, but that's a trail that will run to the Lakeshore Park that St. Cloud just wrapped up their master plan for. And I feel like there was a lot of bigger transit bubbles of the on-off, the ridership that maybe if realigned along Florida Avenue would be a nice north-south connection. And maybe if we think about aligning those transit stops along that, it would be a better connection for bike ped specifically. Just a comment. So you see the big bubbles are kind of offset a little bit. If we could maybe realign them along Florida Ave and provide just a lot of that specific pedestrian and bicycle connection there, then it also helps cars know that that's where pedestrians are going to be. So they're obviously more careful in that location instead of just having everybody cross in all these different locations. It's a little bit easier to manage and then safer once the infrastructure is put in place. So just an observation generally that I would look into.
Thanks, Emily. Can I just clarify when you said the north-south with Florida Ave? I think Miles said their intent is to move the bus to 192. So I'm not sure. What were you talking about?
No, I was just trying to say that align the bus stop, maybe put it on Florida Ave and 192, just so that they, instead of having it off-centered at like right next to New York, maybe having it on Florida. That way that those that ride transit can then have a nice, safe facility to either walk or bike to get to downtown Lakeshore. I mean, instead of being offset.
Yeah, so the nice part is we get to pick new stop locations, right? So if we're going to 192, then we probably wouldn't have as many stops as you currently see now. So yeah, I made note, we will look to emphasize Florida as that stop in that location versus, like you noted, clustering them. Because then that allows us to put, more amenities in one location instead of trying to spread things out as well.
Probably better wayfinding signage too for those that do want to ride transit, maybe don't know where to go from there, that, hey, the Lakeshore Park is this direction, and it's all kind of somewhat seamless. The Lakeshore Park master plan, we've also provided recommendations of connections from Lakeshore Boulevard to the park itself. So there's some mid-block crossings that we've recommended for them to install in addition to the ones that are there. So maybe looking at those and how we align the north-south movement of whatever potential bicycle plan maybe comes out of the visioning of this project, and how we can align that with the crossings along Lakeshore. Just a long-term suggestion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does someone want to answer? Paula asked a question about moving the bus to another east-west route other than 10th or 13th, and I think the answer generally is if you get too much smaller of a route than that, people don't want the bus traveling down really smaller streets if you live along those streets. But the flex routes that Lynx does is a smaller vehicle typically, and that would be more of a demand response. So that would be almost like, Miles, if you want to cover like door-to-door, closer to door-to-door type service in that area, that area.
Right.
Do you want to clarify that, Miles?
Yeah, these are very small vehicles, holding on average, maybe 12 passengers. Can still accommodate wheelchairs if need be. But yeah, it's a fixed geographic area. Generally, this would be bound from Lakeshore down to 17th, over to roughly Narcoossee and back to, looking at the map, I think about Brown Chapel Road, maybe a little bit further. I think the Walmart is a little further west of what we're looking at. And yeah, so it's not door to door, it's curb to curb. You would schedule the ride in advance. You can either call up Lynx, or there's a mobile app, of course, for that. And it would pull up to the curb outside your destination, be it a residence or a place of employment, and take you anywhere within that geographic area, just for the same fare as a normal fixed route bus trip. So if you need to go to a bus stop or from a bus stop, it can pick you up there. If you need to go to a house to place to buy some food, you can do that just as well. Normally they have one designated time point to keep a schedule. That would be every hour, and that's about it. Just this, I think we're proposing just one fixed time point, and the rest of it would be on demand.
So hopefully that helps. Do you want to go back to segment 2 then?
Sure. All right, so this is segment 2, and then if you remember, there's the smaller segment within that has between Massachusetts Avenue, Florida Avenue, or they have this 90% design plan. So I think this is like an interesting typical section to look at to kind of see if it makes sense to maybe continue this typical section east and west a little bit further, just kind of like that core downtown segment, and then also like how you would transition from kind of what we have proposed here into this. So that's kind of like the gap in between here to here.
Yeah, because when you do get outside of the core of the downtown, you do generally have like sidewalk on one side, typically the two travel lanes. And you've got mailboxes in some driveways, but it's not commercial for all that long. So there's been discussion of, do you still maybe put on-street parking in front of the residential homes? You know, how do you try, if we were to try to have some type of a bike facility, you know, you save a lot in efficiency by if you put a trail in, because that also would be width you would have spent for a sidewalk. So by the time you try to do like 2 bike lanes plus a sidewalk, you just start running out of room in 50 feet. When you think about, you do the math of even 2 substandard like 4-foot bike lanes, that gives you 8 feet, and then the sidewalk 5. It just ends up being big, lots of space. So, all right, we'll keep going to the next one, and we can talk about each mode if we need to. So the last segment.
So no thoughts on segment?
Yeah. Any other? We can always come back and talk mode specific, but I know I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, we have one thing just to speak to the zoning in the area on the segment downtown. We have unique zoning regulations that don't require the private sector to bear the load of the parking on their lots. So the opportunity for on-street parking is pretty critical, and the Central Business District does go 1 block west of Massachusetts over to Kentucky. And so that's on the south side of 10th Street currently. That is just something, if we could capture that last block, I think would be important to the west. I know that there are some opportunities for shared parking agreements and things that we're going to be delving into that are a little bit east of Florida Ave, 1 or 2 blocks. So while the need for the on-street parking isn't necessarily there, there are a bunch of churches on the south side of 10th, but we're looking at opportunities to share their parking lots when they're not in session. So if and because of the way that we shut down the grid of the downtown area, a little bit of on-street parking just outside of Florida and Massachusetts would be helpful, you know, within reason, within a block or 2, you know, but that's just kind of if we were to shut down the portion of the street that only had the on-street parking on it, then we don't gain much during those events. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll talk about the last segment, and I want to make sure I leave enough time to go back to the goals and objectives.
Jeff, I wanted to bring up that we did a couple data observations just south. There's an elementary and a middle school location. There's a lot of kids crossing 10th specifically. I think that crossing is Dakota Ave. So I know we talked a little bit about the bike network, but just keep that in mind that that's a crossing for school. I like the idea of the on-street parking, as Aaron said. I would be a little cautious about putting it in this specific area just because a lot of parents would use that, I think, for drop off and pickup for their kids. So that would have to be managed really well. But we do see a lot of kids using these crossings at this specific intersection. So.
Okay. Capture that.
And we have a trails plan that indicates a desire, although I'm not sure that locally that plan's a little bit antiquated. At one point in time, we considered putting a bicycle system on 11th. And the challenge with that is, one, east to west, it's not a thoroughfare. It has a stop every single block. And it could, we could transition the way that the stops are, but you'd have to reconstruct every intersection to make there not be a hump, and it would be very complex, at least through the really historic part. So I don't know if there are opportunities east to west to kind of, in the areas where it does get down to limited right of way, to do kind of a parallel corridor and transition the bike lane on and off of 10th, but still keep it moving east to west. But in the past, there has been some consideration of keeping them slightly separate and putting different types of facilities on different east-west corridors. But it's challenging to implement with the way that the intersections are constructed currently. Costly.
Aaron, it's like you were on our walking audit. We talked about this very idea, and
Okay.
and you brought up a lot of the same challenges. So that makes we'll consider that too, and that would be something in the alternative that we would.
There's definitely an
consider.
opportunity, right, of a bike facility maybe in segment 1 and 3, and then transitioning into a parallel bike facility through that segment 2, where you're kind of swapping out that space for on-street parking.
Let me go get my charger cord.
So I don't know if there's anything else to add about segment 2, and we can move on to segment 3. I think there's some interesting discussion to be had here as well. Were there any final comments?
We can always circle back to. I just want to make sure we do cover the objectives and.
Yeah, I think so. This segment we kind of try to draw out in our typical section some of what's going on through this segment here, where there's some of the. Sorry about that. There's these shared access driveways, and we see where the green changes color. That's actually where the right-of-way line is. So there is more opportunity, at least in some segments of this portion, where it widens out to 80 feet from 50 feet on the other segments. However, it is in kind of a more suburban transition area, and I guess somewhat seems like people's front yards.
So the two big takeaways here is the grid doesn't exist past Mississippi. So there's not that parallel route option. And the right-of-way for lots of the area opens up pretty big to where you could almost create like a linear park trail as a separate facility, except for when you get to like the cemetery area where it narrows down to like a 40-foot right-of-way. So there's a little bit of a pinch point at the cemetery that it makes it hard to kind of carry that same type of trail park concept through the whole way. And then there's not the parallel route. So, and then the travel lanes are like in a lot of areas, like 9.5 feet, like really narrow. We got a lot of complaints about that, but ironically, we have a lot of speeding still. So it's one of those things where 9-foot lanes do feel like, especially you've got buses going through here too. So we want to be conscious of not just widening the lanes to make it safer for vehicles, which it does, but then resulting in speeds. So we need to be really careful about the trade-offs that we do. Any thoughts, feedback, ideas? Okay.
Well, we have, 10-foot parking spaces for a reason, because we've got a lot of big trucks. So they're there whether the lane accommodates them or not. And, I think that the need to have the pavement width is pretty critical. I do have questions about, and forgive me for not knowing more about the cemetery here, but on the north side, it looks as if on the south side, that there's a few feet of there don't look to be gravestones in the first 20 feet or so. And have we examined any of the opportunity? Is it just dead in the water? Is it so historic that there's no opportunity to look into anything there?
I'd love to have somebody that works for St. Cloud that's relatively new at the city that could help research that topic.
I
Because
will
we have
do
not
that.
had Oh,
As
come
long
on,
as
Aaron.
nobody else has already done it, I will dig in.
No, we have not dove into that. The concern too would be with federal funds. This is like one of the first, this is a cemetery that dates back to like post-Civil War, like Civil War Union veterans. So there's a lot of historic significance. So even using part of the cemetery, even if there's not grave sites, like the wall and the fences there.
The fence, and there's some historic markers there, and I believe it's largest Union cemetery south of the Mason-Dixon line is what it is. That's not as much as I can tell you about the cemetery, but.
So we haven't had a chance to dive into that too much. I'm sure there's someone at the city and the Parks Department that specifically takes care of the cemetery we could follow up with, but not optimistic that using part of the cemetery land. But I didn't really look at where the graves. I didn't think about the graves when we were.
Yeah, I was just looking at the fence line. Okay.
Yeah, and Paula's got the exact number of Civil War veterans.
Yes, perfect.
So.
Thank you.
Yep. So then,
You want to move on?
yeah, let's talk about the goals and objectives.
Okay. Sorry, that's a delay getting there.
Yeah, and as we look at these goals and objectives, I think what's most important are two things. One, if you have concern with anything, that's listed here, that would, any heartburn over anything that's there. And the second, are we missing anything? These are grouped based on the highest goal areas based on the public feedback to date. Again, after today, we'll send these out to the project visioning team for kind of last call feedback. But if there's anything kind of for the good of the order or that you want to kind of speak to today, we'll definitely take that into consideration.
One thing, I'll just get the conversation started by saying one thing I think I heard today was the third bullet under economy. We talked about consider bicycle pedestrian connectivity between 10th, adjacent neighborhoods, existing and future transit stops, and US 192. And I would say we should add and Lakeshore Boulevard, like the Lakeshore, park.
And even maybe opportunities for that adjacent parallel corridor as well, connections to maybe 11th Street.
Well, I think 11th would be an alternative. But to me, we should call out that.
Yeah, definitely Lakeshore.
The connection to Lakeshore.
I think that's a good suggestion, Jeff. We'll, as we send the notes out to the group, we'll include that note incorporated. I don't want to pull teeth or pick on anyone. I feel like I've done my picking on people today, but we definitely want to get some feedback here because, like I said, as we move into kind of next steps, this goes from kind of policy and kind of to more of a scoring process for us as we're evaluating alternatives. So I want to make sure that if something's missing or needs to be emphasized, this is a good time for that feedback to be had. Dirk, I saw you came off mute. You had some feedback?
Just a couple of thoughts. First, with the city's initiative to bring a Florida Avenue bike trail up to 9th or 10th Street, one of the things we've been wondering is how we make that right-hand turn into the downtown area. Okay, so once we do that, then how do I get people to stay and shop from a business standpoint? So for me, just my mind immediately goes to New York and 10th with the market the 10th Street Deli. People are just using that as a stop and get through town. So I really liked some of the things I saw, having spent some time with Smart Growth America. I really liked some of the things I saw about some trees and some slow down type strategies, because I really like for people to stop and take a few moments to look around as they're going through downtown and have a look at the businesses. Just a comment.
No, that's great feedback, and I think it's as we get into solving for that, speed for speed reduction, there's an acknowledgement that you have to put in those design features, horizontal and vertical, to obtain, the warranting for speed, but also for, people to actually have that kind of response and to change their behavior. So great feedback.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And were there design features in the, you said the 90% plans for 10th Street? Or is that something that we're envisioning as a part of this project?
They're already established.
Okay.
That typical section that we showed. I did have another suggestion based on what I heard today, was maybe under the health, something along the lines about improving the quality and comfort of bicycle pedestrian connections to parks and schools. That was kind of building upon what Emily had said, that I don't know that our objectives really call that out as much as it should. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Emily, any thoughts? Or
so along the same lines, Jeff, I was gonna suggest some enhancement in the language in safety specific to bike peds and specific to intersections in general. I know you have it under health, provide a safe and comfortable place to walk, but I think the safety aspect needs to be underscored, specifically along this corridor. And I think, we've got a senior population that's over in that first part of the segment of the road. The medical arts district, we're probably going to have an increase of maybe an older population there as the master plan kind of develops further. You've got the schools kind of in the middle downtown, but you, as Dirk said, you want people to come and linger and stay as well. So how do you kind of get everybody to feel comfortable? And so that's why I think safety, should be probably for pedestrians specifically, should be kind of underscored. Not sure where that resides in what bucket, but just maybe making that more of an accentuated point.
Yeah, one of the things we tried not to do with the objectives was when there's overarching, like prioritizing the safety of pedestrians. I don't know if it's coming through. Our general approach is to prioritize, the most vulnerable users first, but does that really show up in our criteria? So like reducing speeding, the way we looked at it is we could look at design criteria or the concept of an improvement and say, well, what does this do towards reducing speeding? Just to say we want it to be safer, but we could say, well, there's more deflection with this one, or there's more enclosure. So that was why we laid the groundwork with some of those design techniques. So I agree with you that like safety of pedestrians and bicyclists.
Yeah, I'd say like this is the overarching framework of how we're approaching it. With these are some of our like specific goals and objectives. Is that?
So I keep thinking about that one of how we'll send this out. You can think of tweaks. I am trying to guard against like creating like a million objectives to where the point where it's too hard to evaluate. So sometimes it's like working that criteria within existing ones is a way to do it too. So we're open to ideas. That's a good point though. Something about seniors, I don't know if we really addressed that. I don't know if that's getting too specific, but I'll put a question mark up.
I think the vulnerable users is a good general, because that covers everybody from 6 to 90, right? That kind of covers everybody that's outside of a 2,000-pound vehicle.
Yeah. Does anyone have any others? I have another question. I guess, Dirk, you brought up about landscaping or trees. And one of the things that's going to end up happening in the alternatives is we're going to have a push and pull between a wider, more bike facility or more pavement width for certain users like bikes or peds versus more room for trees. And then we've got power lines like transmission poles running down the corridor. And I think it's kind of one of those things like sometimes we pave over everything, we put the lanes that we're going to put, and then we make the trail as wide as the trail can be, and then we're left with like no trees or landscaping. And they're like, did we really achieve everything we wanted to? So how do we, when we evaluate and come up with alternatives, like sometimes a narrower trail is better because you actually have a decent tree. At least that's my on project. So I don't know that we really, it's kind of built into these criteria a little bit, but thoughts on that kind of, where does trees fit in to the mix?
I think we can have that in community maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Emily, thoughts on that? I know that's one of you were shaking your head.
So one of the things that I did, and we had the same issue, right, where we run into right away, and you've got to, what comes first, right? The wide sidewalk for your comfortability, but no one's going to use it if it's 95 degrees outside and there's no shade. And so what we did was we implemented a street tree program, whereas we were able to luckily work with our attorney to just basically have a program where we paid for private property owners to have a tree in their front yard. They maintained it, we paid for it. And that was a way to get the canopy in on private development where we couldn't necessarily achieve that in the right of way. That's not always going to work in every location. Obviously, there's going to be site constraints on the private side as well. But we usually tried to work with them to determine like the best location for the tree to maximize that benefit. And we used impact fee. We have a tree bank, and we used the public tree bank fees in order, because we claimed it was a public benefit, even though it was positioned on private property, it still gave an aesthetic and public benefit. And that's how we were able to frame that. So I can certainly share that policy with you and certainly, help come up with other ideas, but it's really important to have that balance, Jeff, and you can put in the greatest facility, but if it's really going to be hot out, no one's going to use it. So there's a good balance that has to occur there. Absolutely.
So I see Cynthia has her hand raised, probably with a follow-up on this or something.
I do. And I was just going to chime in. And I think what I thought of immediately when Dirk made his comment about, finding a good way to make sure that people are stopping in downtown and spending some time there is just, how can we improve the placemaking and, maybe some really nice aesthetically pleasing places for people to park their bikes, in addition to the shade and just making it more pleasant for people to be out and about, even in our nice Florida heat. But it is a trade-off, as you were saying, Jeff, with finding the space versus space for the actual trail.
Does this placemaking kind of, did we capture it with the second bullet, or do we community, or do we need another that kind of talks about the placemaking and landscaping? I think we talked about this, Jen. I think we were worried about getting too many objectives too.
We have this one under economy, right? That says maintain consistency with the downtown revitalization project and the Envision St. Cloud downtown master plan. So I think a lot of that is probably captured in those projects, specifically for the downtown, like the part by New York Avenue. But yeah, we could add some more, I want to say like sub bullets or something, but we can think about how we can make that clear.
I think some type of
expand. So maintain consistency and expand the downtown development projects.
I like that, and expand.
The other thought is, bullet point or section 4 down here, community, there's this often push here between growth and maintaining the small town character. And I think this feeds into that as well, making the downtown area especially walkable, which it is now, but not have to worry about dodging cars at the same time, is huge to me. Okay.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we added that one in there and it's in quotes too, that was some of the concerns that we had in the online survey was, don't turn downtown St. Cloud into downtown Orlando, that kind of sentiment. And a lot of we like our small town and want to maintain it. So we really wanted to capture that. Nothing that we're going to recommend is in conflict with that idea.
A little bit of a rivalry with Kissimmee there too. And in the comments, we don't want to be them type of thing. I like when people take pride in their community. That speaks volumes. So, yeah, my only concern is consistency. I don't know if that feels specific enough as a separate bullet under community, but it might, as long as we can still find a way to make it fit on one slide. That was sort of my criteria of how many bullets, how many objectives are too many. Well, it's got to be on one slide. So.
That's dangerous for an engineer, Jeff.
I know, we could just make it smaller font and violate all of Cynthia's rules about, on this, the way we're doing these reports or the product with working with Alice is, this is intended to be a little bit more content than a normal PowerPoint, so that if you get the slides later, you have the material to be able to go back and explain to others what we're talking about. And then this is the documentation of the project, instead of giving you a separate standalone report that nobody remembers and reads as much. So it's a little bit of a hybrid.
I guess I'm curious. One of the things that I find that's done so well on 10th Street is the way that they've done the landscaping is not huge masses of trees at the corners, but trees that are overhead. But if you've got to wait for a couple cars to pass, you're not standing in the sun. And I'm curious if there's an opportunity to keep that kind of brand, the look of a pedestrian crossing, or that there's a pedestrian presence further east and west outside of the downtown. So it's almost like little entry features, but only at places like, say, Dakota, or Florida, where there might be more pedestrians crossing, and that they would look forward and see that if I don't cross now, people will expect me at the next intersection.
Kind of highlighting those gateways of where are we at?
Yeah, one of the things I think is kind of a little bit of an interesting change is I feel like as engineers and planners, sometimes we're we've got to concentrate all the PEDs to cross at certain locations so the drivers expect them at those locations.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also find it interesting with the new DOT design manual. Now they're reinforcing more crosswalks, more shorter blocks on the entire corridor. So it's in a way, DOT is kind of recognizing that the design technique of just focusing the PEDs in crossings at certain locations is not necessarily the only way to go with the approach on the corridor. So, which I thought was kind of interesting, because if you look at the number of crosswalks, there's long stretches through here where there's not crosswalks.
Mm-hmm. I think especially with the 25-mile-per-hour design speed, that you really could be expecting pedestrian crossings kind of throughout this gridded network.
So I think we can go on. What we're going to do, as I mentioned before, we're going to take the feedback that we got from today, obviously put a summary together, which I'll talk about in a second. But as it relates to goals and objectives, we'll send you, an updated version based on today's discussion. and we'll get your feedback on that, and we'll provide some context as well. So no, I think that was some good additions and insights there, to help us kind of, provide a little more focus to the work that we're doing. Jeff, why don't we go towards the end of the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I think we covered all the next steps, Alex, was the, oh, I'm sorry. We also have a couple more slides. We have the, the public comment, sorry.
Yeah, before we get into that, let's go to the, let's go back to the process slide. I just want, the majority of the partners that we have online today are our city or county staff. But we're going to be using this project visioning team a couple more times, throughout the planning process. We're going to be meeting, with some other groups in a pop-up fashion, but also kind of commission in a more formal sense, or council rather, in a more formal sense, as we have something to chew on. So like I said, we're going to be sending out those objectives for your review, and I'll provide a timeline for getting that feedback from you, just so we can kind of keep moving through the process. But we will be in touch again, with a meeting summary in addition to, getting your final feedback on those objectives. But as you can see here, the intent is to wrap up, really in the next year. But we're going to be keeping, there's going to be public engagement occurring throughout, at important milestones for this. And like I said, we'll be coming back to this group along as with some other local stakeholders throughout the study process. So before we move on, we do have a public comment section, but I just wanted to, before we do that, just a shout out to city staff. This, like I said early on, this work, Metro Plan Orlando, we're utilizing our general planning consultant to conduct this work, but it really, the St. Cloud staff has been, instrumental, especially Mary Emma, Andre, and Trinette with planning, kind of, helping us kind of really get our word out and kind of connect us with stakeholders. So, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you and thanks in advance as well, for the help we're going to ask for as we start to get into, those alternatives analyses and concepts that we'll be developing over the next course of the year. So, but with that being said, I just wanted to kind of have a member comment section. We do have a few minutes, and I would like to give you some time back to your day. But before we go to public comment, I just wanted to kind of open up the floor one last time to see if anyone else had anything to add. If not, we'll go into public comments, but I'll give you guys just a moment to think about that. And then if you do, please raise your virtual hand. All right, I'm not seeing any. So again, I appreciate you guys participating today. But before we wrap up, Jen, if you can go 2 slides, we'll go open up a public comment section here. As I mentioned early on, if you're participating on Zoom, you can raise your virtual hand, or if you're dialing in online, you can press *9, and we'll see that you're recognized. Based on what I'm seeing here, we do not have any members of the public, so just our panelists and a few others that have joined in from city staff. So not seeing any public comments for today. We did not receive any in advance of the meeting as well, but we'll keep you in touch with or up to speed with any feedback that we do receive post-meeting. This meeting was recorded. We are you go to the next slide. Like I said, the meeting is recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube channel, in the next couple hours. If you have any questions, anything in the interim, it can reach out to me directly. I've already probably sent you a few emails, so you have my contact information. Jen and Jeff are always there to help with the more challenging questions. I always farm those out to them. But like I said, we'll definitely be in touch. But if you need anything before then, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. to so we can keep in motion. Jeff, Jen, anything else before we wrap up for today?
I just really appreciate everyone's time and thoughts. I miss seeing everybody in person, and I'm looking forward to. I'm upset that a few of these people, like Emily, wasn't out there on the walking audit, because she's got all the details. So I'm sure she's going to drag us back out there for a redo.
Yeah, I guess that would be nice to gauge y'all on. I think our next meeting would probably be mid to late August, maybe early September. Thoughts on that being in person? I think.
We'll work that out with Alex. But if we do that, we'd probably be something down at the city, and then we could go look at things in the corridor as well.
Stay tuned on next meetings and format of that meeting. We'll definitely be coordinating with city staff and see how we want to convene the next time. But we have a couple months before we do that. So, but we'll definitely be in touch sooner, like I said, with objectives for your final feedback and a summary of today's discussion. And we'll include
I would think
slides. And
I think we'll be sending out a summary and later this week. For feedback, and just like any comments on the meeting. Alex, did you want to talk about how long people would have to give any other feedback or on the material?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like for us to turn, once we turn around, I'll provide some notes and expectations, in the email that I send to the group. But, we'd like a generally quick turnaround. So I'll offer probably a week from when I send it out. Just to make sure that you have time to kind of let it soak in and to provide some constructive feedback. So don't want to rush you, but we also want to make sure that we stay on course. So stay tuned. You'll definitely be getting a couple emails from me in the next week or so with follow-up materials. So
sounds good.
Other than that, we like Jeff said, we appreciate you participating, but stay tuned for more. We'll talk soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.